welcome to the first episode of Guardians and Gunslingers, a Dark Tower podcast. I'm Griffin.
And I'm Dylan.
So what we're going to be doing on this podcast is doing a chapter-by-chapter read-through of the entire Dark Tower series, starting, of course, with The Gunslinger.
Yep.
I have read the entire series. I just finished it a couple months ago, actually, and couldn't wait to do another read-through, so we decided a podcast would be a great way to go about it.
Yeah, and I've never read anything by Stephen King, so I'm thinking this should be pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be a hell of a start. So, even though I'll know some things about the future of the series and some twists and turns and foreshadowing, I am going to do my best to be as unspoilery as possible, both in the interest of you and any listeners who might be new to the series.
Good.
So for this first episode, we're going to be taking a look at part 1 of Chapter 1 of The Gunslinger, aptly named The Gunslinger. So it's going to be sections 1 through 12. So we're going to be covering Roland's arrival at Brown's hut in the desert, up to about halfway through his retelling of his time in Tull. So, what do we see in this first little section here, our introduction to this series?
So, we open up into a desert. It's a wasteland, obviously. So, we see Roland, the gunslinger. He's walking along. He comes to a hut. He kind of just rambles on for a little bit. He's walking along, not really doing much, chasing the man in black.
Yeah, that's the introduction that we get, and I think a lot of people would consider that first line of the entire book and of the entire series, which is the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. I'm pretty sure some people probably hold that in esteem to be one of the best opening lines to any book, just because it's so vague and it's so there's so much could be taken from it, but yet it's the perfect apt description for literally all 7 books in the series. Well, 8. I haven't read the 8th one actually, so
that'll be a first
do
one.
That when we get there. Yeah, that'll be a first timer. Should be fun. So yeah, we basically see Roland kind of scavenging and surviving his way through this desert, which from all of the descriptions we see, it's just this totally dead, sparse wasteland. The only plant life is devil grass.
Yes.
Which I think he describes it as a greasy light that has demons dancing in it.
Yeah, and if you look into it, you'll go mad.
Yeah. So basically everything is terrible.
Yes. And it goes on forever.
Yeah. But, he makes his way through, and eventually he comes across a little hut dwelled in by a guy named Brown.
Yes, and his, talking raven Zoltan.
Yeah, who's really just
we'll get to him later.
Interesting character. So yeah, and they have a little bit of discussion talking about where Roland came from, which he doesn't give too much information on, and we get a bit of insight into how Brown is managing to survive in this wasteland. And eventually, with a bit of prodding and encouragement from Brown, Roland starts to retell his story of his time in the town of Tull, which he had mentioned before that he, one of my favorite slang terms, set my watch and warrant on it. He guarantees to Brown that he was nearly killed in Tull, but doesn't tell him more than that.
Right.
And we kind of open up into the first minute of his arrival in Tull and just kind of sets the stage for that.
Yes. So he arrives in Tull, and it's your typical, at least in my mind, your typical Wild West town, kind of desolate. I'm picturing the good, the bad, and the ugly. There's nothing in this town except, drunks. Nothing grows here. Everyone's poor and impoverished. And he goes up to the saloon, or as he calls it, the cafe, and he walks in, orders some hamburgers, which he aptly describes as, I believe, not prime, essentially.
Oh, well, yeah, it's kind of a running theme throughout the books, is that there's stuff called threaded stock, and that's basically it's usually cows that are not mutated, because the norm now is for most animals to have some disgusting mutation that they gain through some untold means.
Yes.
And they claim that it's threaded stock. Roland's like, that's bullshit. Like, I'm not going to think about where these came from.
Yep.
Which, like, do the same thing.
Yeah. Threaded stock my ass.
Yeah, and then, he gets 3 burgers.
And then he runs into probably the most interesting part so far, Nort.
Yeah.
Who is pretty much walking dead, essentially.
Yeah, he's basically a zombie. He's become addicted to the devil grass, which it was mentioned beforehand is something that you could just burn for fire out in the desert. But it's also a drug, and you start out, typically if you're an addict, it says you'll start out by smoking it, and eventually you'll just end up chewing it, and it turns your mouth green, and it just basically drains the life from you.
Yeah.
And Nort was like full, like final stage addict.
Yeah, and he tells right away the man in black has been through here and is the cause of this.
Yeah, something about he just kind of leaves this weird, eerie kind of not chaos, but just I don't know. He has a wake, and Roland like knows like his scent basically. You can see he knows his effect on people.
So he prowls around the bar a little bit and meets up with Alice, who he then very quickly beds. I was very impressed at his speed that he was able to do that.
That's a really sad scene to me.
It is.
Because Roland is kind of an asshole.
Yeah.
Because there's a point where it's described that she like raises her hands to her face because she's like crying.
Yeah.
And Roland's like, oh, like I'm glad you put your hands in your face because now you're not as ugly. And I'm like, wow, you're a dick.
Yeah, he doesn't really pull any punches.
No, he does not. And we kind of see through Allie's tale to Roland what the man in black was doing in Tull as he came through and what he had to do with Nort. And it's like a very, very disturbing scene. And it's especially interesting to me because usually in stories like this you have resurrection being treated as like a divine intervention kind of thing, and it's to be celebrated, like someone didn't die. But in this, you have Nort, who is hopelessly addicted to devil grass, and he throws up blood all over the place. And they just lay his body like in the middle of the bar.
Yeah.
And then the man in black shows up and instantly freaks everybody out. Which, like, reading the scene is...
It's kind of, I'd say, eerie.
Yeah, it's very eerie.
Allie immediately doesn't like him, I'd say.
Yeah.
But she's strangely attracted to him as well.
Mm-hmm. Which I think is just like, I think that really nails down like the kind of vibe that you're supposed to get from him. It's like he has like a strange magnetism to him, but yet like he's completely repulsive.
Yeah.
So when he arrives, I mean, he sees Nort just with his body laid out in the middle of the saloon, and he's like, all right, like, let's do this. And he's going about it like, well, I think Roland describes him as like the man with the rabbit in the hat. Because he's like, well, he's no god, he's just a magician. But
he's definitely playing God.
Yeah,
in Tull.
He is. Some way, somehow, he starts. I love the descriptions of him diving.
Yeah, going over Nort's body like water.
Yeah, he just jackknifes over him like again and again and again, and then, yeah, like I'd said, like it just feels like wrong somehow because Nort comes back to life, and it's like a rattling breath, and like the smell of death is just like emanating from him.
Yeah, and the way he describes it as when he wakes, he pounds his hand on the table like he's pounding against the roof of a coffin.
Yeah. Kind
of, it's like he doesn't want to come back, but he has to.
Yeah, like it's not supposed to be happening, and yet the man in black is doing it, and he's kind of like braggadocious about it, but at the same time he's like rubbing it in everyone's face that they're so like horrified.
Yeah. And he just thinks it's hilarious the whole time.
Yeah. And then, so we have all this stuff where the man in black brings Nort back to life, and everyone is just scared and disgusted, and then the man in black just kind of like disappears. After he's kind of left his mark on Tull and all of its residents, he disappears, leaves a piece of paper with Nort, which is like especially notable because paper is like one of the most rare materials in the world of the Dark Tower.
Mm-hmm.
Taunting Allie, basically being like, hey, if you really want to like learn the secrets of death,
and I know you do want to know,
because everyone does, like everyone's got this morbid curiosity, like here you go, here's the key, bet you can't do it. And she is just kind of forced to have this knowledge that she could, like, learn all of these otherworldly secrets.
It's really sad, though, because she says next, like, she knows she's going to succumb to that and ask that question, and she knows she's going to go insane, but she's kind of given up.
Yeah.
She's kind of given up hope on that she'll be able to go on existing.
Yeah. And the note that is left by the Man in Black, which is actually, his name is revealed there, Walter O'Dim.
Okay, so that is his real name?
Yeah.
Cool.
It just really kind of sums up who he is, because he goes from, it's kind of all cryptically worded, saying, like, the word is 19. If you want to know the secrets of death, say this. And then, have a nice day, with a little smiley face.
Yeah.
And then he's like, P.S., you'll try to forget, but sooner or later it will come out of your mouth like vomit. And you're like, oh, well.
It's actually very malicious.
It's extremely malicious. And yeah, instantly it has the effect that it's like, God, like, I have to do this now.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we get all this, and then it jumps back into the current timeline, where actually I guess that was another flashback. It jumps from the further flashback into the more present flashback after the Man in Black has left Tull. Roland is there, just talking to Allie about stuff, just being very Roland about it.
Yeah, not really doing anything. He seems, his stoic self.
Yeah. And after that, he starts to have, like, some strange interactions. He goes to get his mule, which it's dead in the current timeline with its eyes pecked out and all. At this time, it was okay, and he had brought it to a stable.
Yeah, Kennerly's, right?
Kennerly's stable. Kennerly, the disgusting old incestuous pervert of Tull, I guess. And they have this conversation, just talking about. Initially, it was just about, I want my mule. Is the mule okay?
Pretty straightforward.
And then he's trying to get some information about where he needs to go next, so he's asking about the desert. And Kennerly just is being so weird.
He is.
The entire conversation. It's mentioned multiple times that he just cringes, and he's like, Roland can sense that Kennerly really hates him, but at the same time he's trying really hard to keep up this, like, facade of just trying to be like a jovial old man.
Right.
But of course Roland can just see right through it.
Yep.
And it like you said about it being about Tull being, like, a very, like, Western movie kind of town. This is totally, like, it encapsulates, the outsider coming in, and everyone's, like, closing up their windows and, like, watching him as he passes through, because he's got these big ass guns on his hip.
Yeah.
And, like, no one really likes him because he's coming in and he's messing up, like, the peaceful solitude of Tull.
Right, well, like, his first action is he gets a kid to talk to him. Yeah. Which all the other kids hate. I think that really sets the stage perfectly.
Yeah, and yet they don't like him, but they all fear him because there's not anyone else like him.
Yeah. So, he has that strange run-in, and he has a few more with some other people.
Well, the big one was Sheb.
Oh, yes, Sheb.
Which is just such a... I had forgotten about this.
It's kind of... It didn't really...
It happened so fast.
Yeah, it almost slipped by me.
So basically Sheb, the piano player in the saloon, he had a relationship with Allie prior to Roland's arrival. I don't think it doesn't really mention how long ago it was or what kind of relationship it was. But, Roland and Allie are in there doing their thing because they don't really do anything in this chapter except just, like, have sex.
Yeah.
And Sheb kicks in the door with a knife and is basically like, "She's mine!" And then goes and tries to kill Roland.
Yeah, he just breaks his wrists.
Yeah.
Like, no big deal.
He breaks Sheb's wrists, and then he has a weird little interaction with Roland.
Where he's obviously... They know each other.
He recognizes him, and he's like, "Oh, you were in Megis, weren't you?" Which comes back in a later book. Mm-hmm. And they have, like, a little interaction where Sheb, like, knows something, and Roland's like, "Oh, but do you remember this? Were you there for this?" And Sheb's like, "Oh, I'm sorry."
Yeah.
So he leaves, and then it's so funny to me. Allie is instantly like, "So where were we?"
Yeah. So let's get back to
it. And Roland's like, "Nowhere."
Yeah.
And just rolls over and goes to sleep. That really brought back. This is honestly the last little section that we're going to be discussing in this episode.
Yes.
Is maybe some of like the most personal characterization you get of Roland, because there's only so much you can glean from, but Sheb mentions...
Yeah, he mentions another woman.
Roland mentions Susan.
Susan.
Like, you remember Susan and Reap Night and the bonfire, and that really, you can tell that having to talk about that kind of resonates with Roland, and he's like, I don't want to...
Yeah,
I don't want to function anymore. I don't even want to have like the little half-assed conversations we were having. Like, I just want to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Which that's something that we see with the conversation with Brown earlier. He asked about in-world, and Roland doesn't respond. He just gives him a look, and Brown knows that that's not something to be pursued.
Yeah.
And that's something that keeps coming back because, you know, he's got a lot of rough memories.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of history here, but not really privy to any of it right now.
No.
So I don't really know much about Roland.
Yeah, there's a lot that you have
Actually, at this point, I didn't even know his name was Roland.
Oh,
they don't even mention his name.
They don't say it until... When does it say it? Does it even say it in this chapter?
I think it says it at the end of the first chapter.
Oh, okay, at the very end.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just the Gunslinger, right?
Yeah, that's as far as I could tell. There's no mention of his name.
Yeah, so that's something that's going to be like a running kind of theme throughout the entire series, is that, well, I know that now, after the series was published, they did a comic book kind of detailing like Roland's life in InWorld, but later in this book, you'll kind of get some more of like what he was doing before this, and I think like the very first, not the first page, but I gotta find.
Well, throughout the whole time, he gives me the man with no name vibe. You know.
Oh yeah.
Clint Eastwood and all his The Good, Bad, and the Ugly and all those movies. You know, it really resonated throughout the whole thing.
And I believe Stephen King has said that was his inspiration. Was he grew up watching like all the Clint Eastwood westerns, and he was like, I want to marry that vibe with like a kind of weird, eerie post-apocalyptic. Well, like, because honestly, you could look at it as some westerns are already, they kind of give off that, even though it was like pre-society, but that kind of, in some ways, is parallel with post-apocalyptic stories. In that, you know, usually just in a desert wasteland, not many people around. So he took that and just added his own little spin on it. Oh yeah, and I was going to say, like, one of the other things you can glean from his past was on the 6th page. He talks about Jericho Hill. He lost his horn and his old friends at the Battle of Jericho Hill.
Oh yeah,
and that's something that we'll continue to hear about. And eventually he does tell most of the story, so you'll get a bit more of that. But yeah, it's kind of a ongoing thing, because you get these like via like Stephen King's descriptions, but Roland really doesn't talk about it.
Yeah, well, I like that. It puts it in Roland's perspective, and since he already knows it, he's not going to think about the entire story again.
Yeah.
He's just going to, you know, he's just getting a brief aside to remember.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that basically sums up most of the events in this first part. Honestly, it's not too much that happens. It's mostly just Roland having like little chit chats and kind of just recapping what had happened before, which I like that it kind of starts at like in media res, because I don't think this would have been interesting if it started with the stuff in Tull.
No.
It's kind of cool to see him afterward and how he is reflecting on it. But so yeah, you're, you know, new to Stephen King, new to the Dark Tower. What did you think of this first part?
Well, it really drew me in. The kind of ambiguous nature of the first several pages. I'm like, wow, this is a really amazing, incredible world that it's set in. You know, a post-apocalyptic kind of wasteland. You know, it's general emptiness. It feels like it could be anywhere, but also kind of nowhere at the same time. Like, it can't exist with other, you know, places. Like, this world is only desert.
Yeah.
And it has always been that way. Or it's been that way for a very long time, and everyone just has come to terms with it.
Well, yeah, you because you kind of get that vibe when I think Brown says it. He's like, the world has moved on.
Yeah,
and that is said so many times in this series, because it has, and you don't know how, you don't know why, and neither does anybody like living in this world. But it's just how it is now.
Yeah,
like,
people have forgotten what's happened to.
Like that's it is what it is.
Yeah. Well, and like the mention of the Birdman, when he's first approaching Brown's house, he sees a man with a bird head, and Brown's just saying, "Oh yeah, he's just a normal dude. I don't mess with him."
Yeah, that kind of gives you a look into it. It's like,
and it's this crazy place, and everyone is just kind of accepting what's going on to them and what's happening around them and not really working to change anything.
Yeah.
They've just, accepted their fate on a dying world, and they're just living out the rest of their days as best they can.
Yep. Yeah, one of the quotes that I really like that kind of sums up the whole vibe of the series, and definitely this first book, is when Roland is having his conversation with Brown, and he has just learned that his mule died. And he asks Brown, do you believe in an afterlife? And Brown's response is just, I think this is it.
Yeah, that was really powerful. That really, I agree. I think that really sets this tone for the whole series.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just people, it's just, everything is awful, but
people are still living for some reason.
Yeah, impossibly, inexplicably, they've managed to survive, and now they came out the other side, and they're just going to make do with what they have.
Yeah.
And even though everything is mutated and weird, nothing makes sense.
So, I didn't really get why Zoltan was even there. He doesn't really do anything for the plot. He doesn't... All he does, he sings some songs about beans, that I was taught as a child. I took as a child's tune.
Yeah. He's just...
And he pecks out the mule's eyes, but I didn't understand what he was doing there. Is a raven... I guess you shouldn't answer this, but I'm feeling like a raven is, obviously a kind of a big figure in mythology, at least.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that'll come back to resonate somewhere.
Yeah, a little bit of that. He's also just a weird character. I feel like he just wanted to include him because I don't think that Roland just arriving at Brown's hut would have given off the same vibe as him arriving there and him just randomly having a talking bird.
Yeah.
That just repeats random stuff that he says. But yeah, it is a little strange. It kind of sticks out.
Yeah, well, I guess it is another way to set the tone and set the scene for the world that he's traveling through. It's kind of mystical.
Yeah.
But at the same time, kind of reality.
Yeah, so, because it's a nice parallel because you have something semi-realistic. There are birds that can just parrot things back at you. And then you have a guy with a bird for a head.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, yeah, so it's really straddling the line between, total, just harsh desert post-apocalyptic reality and a little bit of this fantasy sci-fi stuff sprinkled in between, which I think is just really cool. I don't know if the atmosphere of this book is really, it's not something that I have read anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we're gonna do a little section in each episode where we're gonna talk about our favorite and least favorite characters. So we're gonna do our favorite and least favorite character for this section. So part 1, sections 1 through 12.
Yeah.
And next episode, we'll discuss our favorite and least favorite for that part, and then we'll probably do a favorite and least favorite for the entire chapter as a whole. So, who is your favorite character in this part?
I think we're in agreement here that Brown is kind of the favorite character.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting to me because, of course, Roland is great, but he doesn't really have much to do in the very first part. It's mostly just him talking about other things, and honestly he kind of sucks when he's in Toll.
Yeah, he's kind of an asshole.
Yeah, so there's not much there, but I thought Brown was just, somehow he's carved out a living for himself in the middle of this desert that is mentioned by multiple people in Toll, that you can't really cross it, everyone that tries dies.
Yeah,
somehow he's out there, he's doing well enough for himself, he has food. He can, kind of grow crops. He has running water.
Right.
He's got his little bird pal. What's not to want?
Yeah, exactly. And, all his lines that he talks about the entire time, when Roland, is about to tell a story, he leaves to take a leak.
Yeah.
And he comes back, and Brown asks, have you decided if I'm an enchantment yet?
Yeah.
Kind of knowing what Roland is thinking.
Yeah.
And he's got some very powerful lines.
He's very intuitive. Oh, yeah. I just pulled open another one. Because I had said, I don't know which one I was... Oh, the afterlife line. But he had another one when Zoltan is doing his little...
Beans,
little quotes.
Magical fruit.
Yeah. And Brown says, I tried to teach me the Lord's Prayer once. Guess this ain't Lord's Prayer country.
Yes.
I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Roland runs into, a lot of, annoying and stupid people throughout the series, but Brown isn't one of them. And I think that's really cool, because it kind of subverts, yeah, this guy lives out in the middle of nowhere, with no other people except the guy that brings him his beans.
Right.
And yet he's very astute. And
well, he's also the only person who really recognizes him as a gunslinger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. And I think we might be in agreement for the least favorite character.
Yeah, I say Zoltan. I am just not really a fan of that guy or that bird.
For me, it's either between Zoltan or Kennerly.
Oh, yes.
Because Kennerly will probably, just, spoilers for our next episode, he'll probably win my least favorite for the chapter, because from the very first mention of Kennerly, which...
yeah, I was just looking for the same thing, because, you can't do it enough justice. It's when the man in black is first walking into town.
Oh, yeah.
And everyone's saying, oh, here it is. They watched him come, an old man Kennerly, lying by the window with a bottle in one hand, and the loose, hot flesh of his second eldest daughter's left breast in the other.
Sure. Yeah. And my note there was just Kennerly's a real perv.
Yes.
He is. Not only, is he feeling up his daughters, he's also, just trying to be, this weird, people pleaser, and it just generally seems like the worst. Doesn't really take good care of Roland's mule either.
No.
So
seeing that it dies
later
in the or it dies soon later.
He just sucks.
Yeah.
He's the worst person in Tull. There's really no redeeming qualities for him.
That's true.
Even at least Zoltan is entertaining.
He is at least
gross
entertaining.
And annoying. He loses. He's terrible.
Yeah, I think I will have to switch my vote to that one. Yeah, I forgot about that line.
It's convincing. We're gonna do a section where, since Dylan has not read any of these books, he's going to make predictions. I am not going to confirm or deny any of them. It's just pure speculation for the fun of it.
Yes.
But considering that we have split this chapter into two, he's just going to go ahead and do those predictions at the end of the second episode, just so we know, what's coming ahead in the book.
Well, I can predict what's going to happen next, if you'd like.
Yeah, be a psychic about it.
Well, that's it for this week.
Yeah, so follow us next week, as we're going to go ahead and get through the second part of Chapter 1 of The Gunslinger, which is when shit really goes down in Tull. This has all been kind of the...
It's where everything kind of happens.
Yeah.
I'd say the most interesting part of the chapter.
So, should be fun. And then after that, we'll be moving on to the rest of the book, which should be an exciting ride.
Yeah.
So stay tuned.
I am trying not to read ahead, but it's
very hard.
very
I know.
hard.
It's going to be hard for you. But it'll make for better discussion.
Yeah, and we are reading the revised and expanded version.
Yes, if you were curious, I accidentally bought the original version, and I had to go back and get it because this version is 35 extra pages with some added references to later books. So
yeah,
if you're reading along with us, if we ever drop any page numbers or anything, you'll know to follow along in the revised version. All right.
Well, we'll see you next week.
See ya.